Hi, I'm JD Sleep with General Guitar Gadgets. Today I'm going to give you a valuable tip about building guitar effects kits. Several days ago I received an email from a guy who had purchased from us a Phase 90 phase shifter kit, and he was having some trouble getting it working, and so after some email exchanges I invited him to go ahead and send it to me, and I'd take a look at it and see if I could figure out why it wasn't working. So a couple of days ago I received a package from him, and so let's go ahead and take a look at what I got. So this is what I received back from him. It's a built kit, but it's obviously not built in an enclosure. He did not send it on the cardboard. I got it taped down into cardboard to kind of stabilize it. But what this video is about is that you do not want to build a kit outside of the enclosure. I've been selling kits for almost 12 years now, and this is not the first time that I've received back something like this that was built out of an enclosure. I think it's a fairly common thing for builders to want to build it outside of an enclosure, and I think there's a fallacy that somehow it's going to be easier to get it working and to build it outside of the enclosure, and then when it's working to put it in the enclosure. And I want to emphasize the word fallacy. I'm going to give you 5 reasons why this is not a good idea to build your kit outside of an enclosure. Now, let me just clarify. You're going to populate the PCB, all the components on the PCB itself. Of course, you're going to populate that outside of the enclosure. Once you get the components all soldered onto the PCB, and then you get your hookup wires soldered onto the PCB, at that point you need to install the jacks and switch and everything in an enclosure, and then wire it in an enclosure. So here's the top 5 reasons why this is not a good idea. Reason number 1, it's more cumbersome. It's actually, even though you might think it's easier to do this, it is actually more cumbersome. And what I mean is, just as an example, now you got to plug these things in here, you know, and keep it all straight. I've got it plugged into the DC jack now, but you know, you're going to have to get your in and output. You're going to probably at least make a mistake once where you put the input jack in the output jack, because you got to look at it every time to make sure you know which jack is which. Just flicking the switch on and off is harder to do. So number 1 reason, a little bit more cumbersome just to build it. And once you get it in the enclosure, it's actually solid and it's easier to work with. Number 2, it's not good for the circuit board. I've actually sheared off component before I've got it into the enclosure, just you know, from kind of not watching what I was doing very well. You can actually damage the circuit board, and there's no protection. You might not think an enclosure offers a lot of protection, but it is protecting it quite a bit, at least on 3 sides, and that's usually enough. Number 3, your hookup wiring is the weakest link on your build. I don't know if you've this is a stranded wire, and so it doesn't take a whole lot of wiggling before those wires start breaking off of the board or the jacks, and so you want to have as little bit of wiggle room as possible. And when I say wiggle room, I mean you just don't want to be moving those wires around very much, or they will break off. So what happens is, if it doesn't work right away, you're flipping this over, you're looking at the back of the board and you're flipping it and trying to get it working and using probes and meters on it, and it doesn't take a whole lot of flipping around until these wires start breaking off. And then even before you can even find the problem, you're faced with several other problems you might not even know you have, because the wires are breaking and they're not making good connections anymore. And before you know it, it's such a mess that you don't even know what you're doing anymore. So that's the 3rd reason. You don't want to mess with the hookup wire. Okay, reason number 4 is our design. And I'll explain to you. Here is a Phase 90 that I built in a 1590B enclosure, which is what it's meant to be built in. may not be a very good example because this is quite a bit different than most of our kits, but all of our kits are built so that you can easily get to the bottom of the board when it's in the enclosure. Everything just kind of lifts out, and so that you can get to the back of the board very easily, even when it's inside the enclosure. And like I said, this is probably not a good example. It's a little bit different than most of our kits, but it too is very easy to get around to the back of the board to see things. So there's no real obstacle about debugging these when they're in the enclosure. It's just as easy, if not easier, to go ahead and try to find problems with it while it's in the enclosure. And the number 5 reason is because it is actually easier to build this way. If I ever get this working, then somebody's going to have to stuff it into an enclosure. As you can see, the wiring has not been cut probably to the right lengths that you need to have. You're building it, you're almost building it twice rather than just once. And once you get it working, and if there's a good chance that you get it working pretty quickly, and then you're already in the enclosure, you're already done. It's a lot easier to work with. And there is a bonus reason, and that is that if you've got it inside of a metal enclosure, then you're not going to have any RF problems or anything like that. When a lot of noise problems that you might be getting in this situation are not going to happen when they're in the box, and you can do your wire dress and everything, and it's just it just makes it a lot less noisy while you're doing it. So I hope that this has been an informative video, and thanks for watching.